Folks, I'm going to use some words that some of you may not be familiar with. I'm going to talk about the Oconaluftee River. I'm going to talk about Smoky Campground. And if those don't jog your memory, they're right here in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Cherokee's about, 2 miles that way. And the site, the place, the subject for this bonus sermon is about 5 miles further up the road here. About 30 miles up this road is Gatlinburg, Tennessee. That gives you an idea of where we are. It's tucked in a corner here in the western part of North Carolina that had something not happened 3 weeks ago, I would have never thought about being here. But something did, and I'm not trying to be coy or secretive, but it'll unfold, the idea of the story, and it was pretty powerful when it hit me, and it made me think. You hear me talk all the time about how everything is spiritual. Well, this sure was for me. I bet it will be for you as well. So, behind me is the Oconaluftee River. Just downstream of here, the Raven Fork comes in, and both of them then empty right at Cherokee into the Tuckasegee River. I'm well north of Cherokee. I'm right inside this Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Smoky Campground is right up that way. And if I were to drive about 30 miles through the switchback roads, I'd be in Gatlinburg. The reason I wanted to come to this river is related a little bit to what I thought I was going to do a bonus sermon about in the Yadkin River at Mara Mountain State Park. If you watch that one, you remember that the idea I had was completely different. I gave you a bonus sermon about being in that forest fire, that burn over section. I had planned to paddle my boat up the lake, Lake Tillery, where it becomes the Yadkin River again below the Falls Reservoir Dam. There's some rocks and some real swift water there, and I was going to talk about the need to think first before just jumping in a boat and getting on the water. Little did I know, God does this to me all the time. The forest fire was a good idea, I think. I hope you got something out of that. I did. Then I read some news about right here at this river. News that I'm going to share with you. It happened just upstream. And I want to talk a little bit about reading a stream. And yes, I know this is related to kayaking, and some of you are going to roll your eyes and shake your head. But there's a bigger issue here. There's a real, powerful, for me anyway, pondering, learning point that I want to talk about. And it has to do with the river, and yes, paddling and kayaking. And it has to do with thinking clearly, being prudent. And that's the word I'm going to talk about a little bit. We're going to have to walk upstream. I'll change cameras so you can see where we're headed. It'll be my small GoPro camera, so it might shake a little bit. But I'm going to talk about that one big tree that's down, and another one that's a little upstream on the other side of the river channel. In kayaking and canoeing terms, they're not called trees anymore. They're strainers. And I'm going to talk about what they are and why they're important, why you have to watch for them. So, it's a gorgeous day up here in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. We're going to have to hike about 3/4 of a mile and kind of bushwhack down to the riverside. So, I'll let you see some of what I'm talking about from a distance, and then we'll pick up the thread right there, right at the place where I want to talk about this idea that I think speaks to all of us. So, let's go for a little hike. As we walk up to the spot I was telling you about, we're going to have to cross the bridge and go up the main road a ways. And it occurred to me that I could set the camera up and at least take a picture or so and give you an idea of what it is I'm going to be talking about from a distance, a little perspective from out here about what I want to talk about as I get closer into it. So it looks like there have been somebody let the gate down on tourists here in the Smokies, so if I don't get run over by traffic, I'll turn the main camera on and at least talk a little bit, and you can watch maybe both, and we'll see how it's going there. The camera view, and I'll turn to that in a moment, is going upstream, and it's a nice river. It's a gorgeous river. I fly fished it. I've never even considered kayaking it. But it's class 2, class 3 water. Over my head right now. Judy and I aren't qualified enough to paddle it. But looking ahead, it looks attractive. Except for the strainers. From right here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 trees that are down in the water. And that's what is called a strainer. The water pressure goes through the tree, especially when the water is up higher, and the water level today is a little bit lower than when people paddle it. We'll talk a little bit more about that too. The water goes through that, but if you don't paddle around the strainer, if you get swept into it, the water pressure takes you and your boat into the strainer, and then it takes you straight down to the bottom. And this is one of those lessons where you find out just how strong a river is. If that happens, you can't fight it. There's almost no way to get out once you're into a pin situation, in your boat or out of your boat, in a strainer. They're considered deadly. And that comes into play a little bit. So let's walk further up the river. We'll get to the point I was mentioning, and we'll talk a little bit more then. So now I get to walk and carry 3 cameras and a backpack and try not to trip over my own feet, which I'm reluctant to say, the miracles of editing videos like this you haven't seen, but that doesn't mean I haven't done it. So I'm gonna have to end up going down the bank. I'll let you see that in a moment, and we'll pick up from there. So I'm going to pay attention, and you can watch where we're going. Beautiful spot, isn't it? It's absolutely gorgeous here. I'm gonna have to take a couple minutes to get set up, and then we'll pick up where we left off. Okay. I'm maybe a little less than a quarter of a mile upstream on the Oconaluftee River from the bridge that goes to the Smoky campground and to the Smoky riding stables. The water you're looking at right now, with the river down as low as it is, it's probably class 2 whitewater. The ledge up above me, which you'll be able to see in the other camera, that's a class 3 ledge. I look at it and think, wow, one day I want to be able, have the skills and the confidence to paddle that. It's a nice drop. A little rock you could boof on. That's to get the kayak up in the air. There's a great eddy over here, although this log's not in the water, it comes into play. There's a very small eddy over to the other side of the river. And then you come down and you've got more of a rapid chute where the river turns around to the left. What I mentioned earlier, and I think I mentioned it in video footage that didn't take, so it's probably only on the GoPro, but the logs you see in a river are called strainers, and they come into play paddling essentially by the fact that you stay away from it. You see, water goes through a strainer just like in your kitchen, but spaghetti doesn't, kayaks don't, humans don't. And what happens in the dynamics in the water, especially again as it's running higher, is if you're in a boat and you go into a strainer, the water pressure grabs the boat and drops it. it literally, like an elevator falling, not just going down, I mean falling, pushes that boat down and pins it to the bottom of the river or to the rest of the roots, whatever holding mechanism is there. If you're in the boat and you go down with it, chances are you don't get out of it. The river, this is again, I've mentioned it before, the river's that powerful. Back in 1982 or 83, when I was going through canoe guide training, they showed us old 16mm movies to show us the power of the river. And one of the things, like a strainer, is called a foot entrapment, where if you get your foot caught, the water will push you over, down. You can't breathe. It's called a foot entrapment because if you try to stand up in water that's too fast or too high, too deep, it'll trap your foot. That's why if you've ever been whitewater rafting, they tell you if you fall out, get your feet up until you're over to the side. Don't ever put your feet down in fast water in the middle of the river, in a rocky river like this. They tried to simulate it in the movie that we watched in that nasty Girl Scout camp down in South Jersey in the Pine Barrens. And they almost drowned the guy because he actually did get entrapped. They were trying to simulate it, his foot got trapped, the water cranked him over underwater, and 3 guys pulling on him almost could not free him. Finally, they got his foot free. I think they actually either sprained his ankle or bruised or damaged the ligament to get him free. So the point was made for us. It was a little creepy, a little gruesome. You respect the power of the river. You think first. And that's what I was planning to share with everybody when I was at Morrow Mountain. I was going to paddle up to the Falls Reservoir Dam. There's some rocks and some small rapids there. And I was going to talk about the biggest lesson I've had to learn is to be prudent and to think ahead and recognize this is my skill level right now, and that's a hard ceiling. You don't paddle over your head because you get in trouble. God does this to me. I thought I was going to record that bonus sermon at Morrow Mountain. A burned area from a prescribed forest fire seemed at the moment to be the more powerful subject, the more powerful lesson, at least for me. Little did I know that this is the perfect place for me to talk about prudence. And here's where I get to the point. Because the strainer behind me, that root ball that's in the river where this other log comes across the river, that's where a woman named Megan Thompson died on February 24th. Right here. She was from Cleveland Heights, Ohio, was an experienced paddler. She had years of experience, so a river like this one wouldn't have been a challenge. The river was running higher that day than it was today. It was running somewhere over 1,700 cubic feet per second. Today it's probably maybe 800, maybe 900. So the river would have had a lot more energy, a lot more power. But for experienced paddlers, it wouldn't have been foolish, except for the strainers. There's this one right here. There's this log on the other side that goes all the way through, and there's really not a channel to get through. And the river sweeping around there, the one downstream, that's also down in the water. And to the left, you barely got a tiny little channel. You probably got a ledge, and you've got a rock showing there. So you don't have a clear escape route. This group of paddlers, we're going to put in at the bridge. And 2 of them decided they wanted to walk their kayaks up here to get just a little bit more of this absolutely gorgeous river, a quarter-mile more. And they put in up above the ledge above me somewhere. The first paddler came through and had to eddy real hard and then get back over to get back down there. The second paddler, this woman named Megan Thompson, somewhere in this eddy line, got her stern caught. It threw her offline just a little bit, and then the force of the river, maybe these standing waves right behind me, flipped her. Experienced kayaks don't panic when you flip. You immediately go into your setup, you do a roll. According to the witness, a friend of hers and her boyfriend was downstream. She attempted a roll and didn't make it. It stalled out, it failed. She went back over, and when she was back over, she got swept into this root ball here. And the strainer in a river that's higher than this did exactly what it's going to do. It took her and her boat and shoved them down to the bottom of this water back behind me. She didn't have time to pull her skirt and swim out before she was caught. The paddler right here was able to aggressively paddle right over here, get out of his boat, pinned up on these rocks and logs, and he reached to her. He could not pull her head above water. That's how strong the river was. It doesn't say it in the report on the American Whitewater incident site. It doesn't say it in the Knoxville newspaper and TV news that reported on it. The Charlotte Observer ran a small article about it. But from what some of the paddling community has been saying online, her partner was holding her as she drowned, unable to pull her head above water. She couldn't breathe. In the 3 weeks since, online in various paddling sites and in the paddling forums, there's a big discussion going on. There have been photos about this. One guy took photos and actually photoshopped lines of where it happened. And that was where I got the idea, taking my day off and coming up here and talking about thinking things through. There's actually been a big argument also going on that probably isn't helping anyone, because we're losing sight when we argue about trees and logs. There have been voices say, forget the National Park Service, bring your chainsaws and let's have a work party and let's chop these things up so no paddlers get hurt. The problem with that is it's illegal, and this is the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and the National Park Service goes for the easy fix all the time. If people decide to do that, which is against their regulations, their solution will be to ban paddling completely. It's a complex ecosystem, and it's one where things like this are sometimes going to be in the river. So what do you do? At my skill level, it's an easy question. You pull up over there, you get out of your boat, you walk around. For people who are higher skill level than I am, you certainly think about it. And a lot of the voices who've been looking at the photos and videos online have said, that's too tough. That's too dangerous. You walk around. For whatever reason, those two paddlers on February 24th did not. And so I'm talking to you, and it's a powerful thing for me. I'm talking to you 20 feet away from where a 34-year-old woman drowned. Try to put myself in that situation. What would I do if I slipped and got pinned? And it became pretty clear, I'm not going to get out of this. Had to have been terrifying. Had to have been. That's where this one word that goes so far beyond kayaking and paddling, a word called prudence, comes into play. The Proverbs, that little collection of pithy sayings right in the center of the Bible between Psalms and the prophets. The Proverbs several different times in our Pew Bibles, this is the New Revised Standard, have the word clever used repeatedly. But it's one of those cases where it's not a great translation. The better translation is prudent, and I'll tell you why. In Proverbs 14, the simple believe everything, but the clever consider their steps. Clever right there isn't a good translation of the Hebrew word arum. The better translation from almost every lexicon I've looked at says that prudent is the best way, because clever can be used in a positive, and that's the way Proverbs means it. But 9 times out of 10, clever means crafty or subtle or trying to cheat someone. And that's not what the proverb is getting at here. The simple believe everything, but the prudent consider their steps. Like the step of, do I really put my kayak in up here and try to run this? Or do I exercise some prudence and walk around? do the next 5 miles. Between here and the Oconaluftee Visitor Center, I'm sure there are more strainers. You always paddle around them. You always give them a wide berth. My instructor, Judy, and I have had it drilled into us just on Dutchman's Creek over near Jack Guy's house, or up on the Catawba River just below Callan's Ford. If you see a strainer, a log, sticks, you paddle around them. You always give them a wide berth. It's almost like it's got to be automatic. And as appealing as this little ledge drop and this little eddy line above us, I don't know. You can't make a decision for someone else. That's something else that's free will. And kayaking is all about free will, but would I do it? No. Even if I had the skills for that 3-foot drop, I'd like to think I'm close. I don't think I'm that close. We'll find out the first time I'm at the Whitewater Center this spring. But that, knowing what's below it, I wouldn't touch it. Not at all. In Proverbs 13, there's that same word in Hebrew, arum, that I translate prudent. The prudent do things intelligently, but the fool displays folly. I thought about not using that verse in this bonus sermon. I'm not trying to call a woman who tragically drowned a fool. I'm really, really not. Especially considering she had years more experience than I had. But taking the lesson here of thinking things through for ourselves, remember the old saying, fools rush in where angels fear to tread? That's the call of the gospel. That's the life of discipleship. It doesn't mean we turn our brains off and just blindly follow and say, God will take care of everything. That is foolish. We think carefully. We assess situations. And sometimes we take calculated risks. All of life is a risk. Learning to kayak for me has been similar in some ways when I learned to hang glide in the year 2000. I had 2 weeks of vacation and I went to Nags Head and enrolled in hang gliding school to get my license to hang glide. Never used it much, but had a fascinating time. I had people telling me I'd lost my mind. You're going to hang from a wing in the air? That's so risky. Well, yeah, in some ways it is, but you manage the risk. You were taught to check every bolt, double check it, check every safety measure. And you know, I can hike back out of here and trip on a rock and fall and hit my head and fall down dead. There's risk in everything, including kayaking, including coming to church. We manage the risk by using the brain God gave us, by being prudent. I would tell you to thumb through your Bible and look at 3 or 4 places in the Proverbs, and every time you see the word clever, insert the word prudent there instead. I think you'll get what I'm talking about. It's a beautiful day. This is a gorgeous river. But I have to tell you, it's pretty sad being here. I never met Megan Thompson. I saw pictures of her on her obituary page online. She was 34 years old, and her life was cut short. Some would say, and some have said online, well, yes, she died doing what she loved. That's true. But she could have been still doing what she loved. That's the sad part for me. We take risks in doing everything, but we try our best to manage them. And above all, becoming a Christian doesn't mean we check our brains at the door. God never intended that. We use them because they're a gift. I was going to use this. It's a book I bought in 1976 as part of a Bible study course. It's a book so old the pages have turned brown and it's falling apart. It's called Celebrate the Temporary. And I was going to talk about it because the whole point of being here is that life is temporary. We should celebrate it. We should celebrate it safely, wisely. And each individual of us, we have to make our own decisions. Last night at the camper over in Brevard, I started looking for what I was going to quote this morning, and I couldn't miss the irony of right at the first, where this guy talks about celebrating the temporary, living in the now, experiencing life, not looking off always to tomorrow. And he said, take 5 minutes and get what I'm saying. Put your shoulders back, put your feet on the floor, and take a deep breath. Then take another breath. Do this several times and breathe into your own depth and your own strength. And his little slogan was, what a gift is breath, the supplier of life and strength. Thank God for breath. Thank God for the moment of each breath. It was ironic. There's a woman I've never met had to have been thinking about breathing right there because she couldn't. And that's how she died. The Cherokee EMS did a fantastic job according to witnesses. They got up here, they got her completely out. They found out that limbs had gone under her PFD, under her life jacket. That was holding her. Her paddle, the force of the water was so great, had been shoved up behind her back, under her life vest. And she and the boat and all of that were all pinned together. She couldn't have been pulled out by 3 or 4 guys. It took the whole crew. She'd been underwater for over 30 minutes. They tried to resuscitate her right here on this beach. And she was pronounced dead right here. Very sad. And yet at the same time, isn't it powerful? It reminds us life is temporary. It's a gift. Who knows what tomorrow's going to bring? So let's live it to the full. Let's celebrate it. But let's do so using what God gave us in here. That was the point as well. Prudence, thought, counting the cost. And Jesus said, count the cost before you do it. Can you finish the house? Can you win the war? Think, in other words. That's the idea. I have a couple of scriptures and a few things that I'm going to put on the screen for you to watch and let you see the river. And while you do that, I'm going to try to find a way to get to that log over there. I brought flowers with me. I never met Megan Thompson, and I may never visit her gravesite in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. But I'm going to leave flowers here on the Oconaluftee River today. A fellow paddler. And one thing I've learned in this last year, this is a community in the truest sense. It takes care of its own. It learns from our own mistakes. And it celebrates this thing called life. Something to think about. For me, it was worth the drive to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park to give this message to you. I hope it's something you can ponder. And I hope it's not just overly sorrowful. There is some grief and sorrow in the idea, in the message. There's some irony as well. But there's also hope about the fact that for us, even the death that is coming won't separate us from God's love. So, from the Oconaluftee River, I wish you were here with me. I think you would find as well as I do, this is absolutely gorgeous, even though it is tinged with a little bit of sadness. So peace, grace, mercy from God, and I'll see you later, for sure.